is. All right, so we're officially on.
Okay. Okay, we'll call the City of Olivet Planning and Community Design Commission for this meeting for December 2nd, 2021 to order. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll? Rob Jurgel, present. Carol Wagner,
Present.
Jody Rich here, Richard Brophy,
Absent.
Brian Lewis,
Present.
Daniel Rosenberg,
Present.
and Tim Spiegelglass.
Present.
Let it also be known that the Olivet Planning Community Development Director, Carlos Treos, is in attendance. Is Bridget Walters, is she?
Yes.
As well
She's
as Bridget Walters via Zoom, as well as Council Member Missy Waltman. All right. Did I miss anybody? I don't think so. Anybody else on Zoom from?
We have one individual from the public.
Okay. Well, good. Well, thank you for attending, our lone person who's out in attendance there. We appreciate it. And obviously, I think the person is probably well aware of our meetings, and we're getting better and better with Zoom, so we appreciate it. We will have time for public comments. These are related to items that are not on the agenda item. If you have a comment that's related to anything that's on the agenda, we ask you to wait until then, and then we'll ask you to come on board. Carlos would be the one that would be doing that, and we do ask you when you come on to state your name and address for the record, and we do ask you to keep your comments to less than 3 minutes. We have to do that to kind of respect everybody's time. And also to make sure we get everybody's opinion heard. So we appreciate it. So we do ask you to be as quick and concise as possible. And that would be fantastic. Okay, Carlos, I think we'll move. Well, Carlos, do we have any public comments?
All right, I don't see anybody beyond Mr. Trainin who would like to speak regarding to the site coverage for pools.
Good. Okay, well, I think we'll move on to item 4, discussion items, which is site coverage for pools. So Carlos, you go ahead with your report.
Sure. Chairman, you have the written report that was prepared by staff based on the last commission discussions from November 18th, where the direction to staff was to look at considering authorizing kind of like a reduction of the pool footprint that would be calculated towards square footage, as opposed to addressing the 10% total that had been provided and presented by staff on the 18th. With the goal, I think, and there was some concerns from the commission member that it would minimize the impact and the required change to the ordinance or as a whole. And secondly, kind of control that that there is not any inadvertent or adverse impact by making such a change where all of a sudden we'd have a proliferation of accessory structures. A couple of things I do want to note just to make sure that we're clear from the previous meeting is, so within the article for accessory structures, it specifically identifies the types of accessory structures that are authorized by code, the number that you can have, so you can only have one shed. Doesn't matter how big your lot is, you're allowed one shed. A shed is considered 120 square feet or less. And then it goes through, you can have one gazebo, you can have one deck, you can have one cabana, you can have one outbuilding, which could be a garage structure or some type of other accessory structure, really is the term that could be used. Then the commission has authority to grant more, but it has to go through before the commission. In identifying each one of those structures, there is a maximum that's allowed to be permitted by staff, and anything above and beyond has to come back to the commission. All those accessory structures that are permitted, when you calculate the total square footage, they can't exceed 10% of the lot area. So again, there are controls on, any changes to this ordinance wouldn't proliferate somebody to have 10 sheds on the property. If they do, it's because the commission has authorized them, and one would assume that there was some justification for why the commission thought that a property could. And I mean, it's possible. And that's why we have a process for somebody to come before a body to make that type of request. But the odds are, I would assume, would be pretty slim unless there was some unique criteria.
Charles, may I ask a quick question?
If you can press the speaking to the microphone.
Okay, sure.
Mhm.
So just so I can make sure I'm clear, that's 10% of the lot maximum may be in accessory structures.
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay. So at the last commission meeting, we'll go ahead. Yes, sir.
I do had one quick question. So if you said they could always come before the commission to request like an additional shed or additional item or even go above that number, right? But would that then be setting a precedence that means we would have to allow anybody else, to have two sheds or things?
No,
Or is it
no.
case specific?
Similar to Mr. Martin's comments at our earlier work session in November, this commission has quite a bit of discretion. You don't necessarily set a precedent, but people will bring it to your attention. I mean, and it also impacts staff in terms of, well, they granted it over here, so we lose some credibility in that process when they are granted or the commission extends. What we look at from staff wise is to ensure that the commission in its motions or in its discussions really focuses on specific reasons of why it was authorized, whether it was a 15-acre lot or the topography on the property was so unique, that there's a house with a shed, there's a stream that runs right through the middle of it, and having a shed on the other side may make sense to have another lawnmower. We would try to ensure that there was a justification tied to why that variation, what I'm going to call a variation, because it's not a variance, that variation was granted. But it doesn't prohibit anybody to coming in and just asking because.
Well, I
Just to make
remember
sure.
when we were talking about these sheds and we were, if I remember correctly, Stanford was concerned about, sheds all over the place, somebody having like 4 or 5 sheds, and, making it, looking
Correct.
very haphazard. So I just wanted, if somebody was able to present something that did look nice, that did look presentable, that we, as a commission, we would be able to approve that without setting up, a precedence down the road that it's hard for us to go back to.
Correct.
Okay.
So to summarize the discussions from November 18th, the direction changed to concentrate on the pool, just the swimming pool itself. And to look at if only 50% of that pool footprint would count towards the accumulated total towards that 10% that we were talking about earlier, as opposed to having the whole pool footprint count as 100% to that 10% in there. And that would at least address the concerns that were kind of brought forward by the zoning board of adjustment and being a little bit more flexible with some of these smaller lots. So that's where this draft before you tonight focuses just on the pool, counting it only 50%. And that 50%, that pool is only the pool footprint. That is what holds the water within the walls of the pool. That footprint would only count 50% towards the grand total of that 10%. And I'm sorry, the percentages go back and forth, but that would focus that. And I think some of the thought from the discussion was that the pool itself actually does hold water, but it can fill up and overfill too. So it was trying to mediate or find some type of middle ground of just saying, hey, let's just count it as 50% as opposed to 100%. That was similar to one of the other communities in terms of the research work that Don and I have provided. So,
can I ask a question? So would that have taken care of all the ones that went to the board, all the the different pools that went to the board with this, both these with the 50% full pool footprint and then increasing the administrative duties, would that have taken care of all those requests?
It would have. I think we'll hear a little bit more about that one tonight because we had one case study we provided that wasn't a lot here. Actually did go to the Board of Adjustment
Okay.
in there, and their initial request was sizable. They reduced their requests before appealing to the Board of Adjustment. The new ordinance would put them really close. And I don't want to speak for the property owner, he's on, but they would like to go back to the original request, and no, it would not.
Okay.
I guess in that situation, you said it pretty, I saw the note on it, but if even with the 50%, they're authorized at 850 and they were coming in at 875, we would have the ability to do exception, or would that be Board of Adjustment?
The commission would have the ability on the square footage of the pool, but not the combined total, that maximum 10%. That was at some point, we had to put a wall that the commission itself cannot go beyond the 10%.
So we could say it's okay if your pool's 650 instead of 600, as long as it's within the 10% total.
Correct. And the issue that went, and Tim, maybe more specifically, the issue that went to the Board of Adjustment was not necessarily the size of the pool. They needed approval from the commission because of the size of the pool. This would result, well, this still wouldn't resolve that. It's the second component of this draft that may have. But their issue was, you had the pool, then you had concrete patio, you had additional concrete patio, then you had existing concrete patio, and the accumulation of all those four exceeded that 10%.
Okay.
So, and I hope that doesn't make it more confusing, but the pool footprint within itself wasn't the main issue. It contributed to it, but by itself, it wasn't.
Okay.
And the idea tonight is to just resolve the pool issue first, and then we're going to go back and also look at other adjustments to the
Yeah,
accessory structure.
we would,
Later.
staff would like the commission to consider increasing the pool size,
Yeah.
the pool footprint size. That would be both authorized by staff, and then of what would have to come before the commission. And again, it's not a cap. It's just anything greater than that has to get the commission approval first.
And still has to fall within the 10%.
Yes. Mhm.
Go ahead, Karen.
Carlos, going back to the definition, have we defined anywhere that whether or not the pool area includes or excludes things like fish ponds or?
No, because again, a pool is defined by the ICC building codes.
Okay,
That fish pond or so would be treated differently in there, and it'd be a little bit difficult to kind of address, but the pool is used as what we would require a permit for. It wouldn't be considered as a landscape pond or something
Okay.
associated with that as an excavation or so.
Carlos, you were talking about setting a square footage for the pool. I don't see it here, but maybe I'm.
Okay, so as we continue forward here, and bear with me once.
Carlos, you're not presenting on our monitors. I'm not sure if that. makes a
Oh,
difference.
this should be popping up.
No.
Okay, bear with me 1 second here. All right.
Good,
You
good.
can see her. And I apologize, then it would have made more sense of what I had up earlier. So what we were here in the red was what you have in your report, the proposed amendment about 50% of the pool. So that, I'm sorry, I thought I was seeing it up here, so I thought you guys were seeing it on the monitor. Then if I go to the second component of this, in this yellow area, oops. Here, you'll see the existing criteria and that being proposed by staff, the increase of that square footage. And bear with me so I can get that, there we go. So it would be, increasing the existing pool from 500 to 600, from 600 to 800 and from and the largest being 1,000 for a lot that is over half an acre or nearly half an acre.
How did you come up with those numbers?
Now, those, if you go in the report, we've gone through various different pool permits
Mhm.
to look at what have been consistent average sizes. And 600 seems to be, on the low threshold. There was a couple of pools that are listed in your reports that were 500, but most were in that 600 square foot range. And you'll see that in page 5 and 6 of your reports.
Do we have pools in Alvet that go over 1,000 square feet?
Not that I was able to find. I don't want to say that one doesn't exist, and I did like an aerial search through Google looking to see what the county may have had in there. So the largest one that I could find, at least recently on record, was the 751 square foot one at North Covington Meadows.
Big.
And there was a 756 square feet at 832 Charles Gate.
Yeah, and I appreciate you answering my question, because I think I was concerned, and I remember this conversation now, that did the 50% cover pool or everything else? Because I agree with you, the pool absorbs water, has a little bit of give and take, but the deck does not. So that was my concern, that as long as the deck is counted 100% against the 10%, I'm comfortable with that. Did I lose you?
Why do you want the decks counted?
So
For
my
pool?
concern is if we, and again, it's all about the stormwater, right? In our conversation last time, right? Is that if a pool is, 600 square feet, it's only going to count as 300 square feet against the
Right.
10%. But if somebody puts a 600 square foot pool, but then decides to put a really massive deck, the deck doesn't absorb water, it's going to have runoff, and you've gotten rid of grass or trees for it. And so I think giving people 50% against that deck defeats the purpose of what we're trying to get. It personally defeats that purpose.
But you do have porous material underneath that deck. The deck's not gonna run on. I mean, water's gonna run off between the cracks or to the ends of the boards.
It depends on what the deck is. I mean, sometimes it's wood, sometimes it's cement.
That's all right. When I say deck, I was thinking like concrete.
Yeah.
Oh, pool deck.
I was thinking
Right.
pool deck.
Pool
Yes,
deck.
not-
Okay, I
not
was
like-
thinking
not
of
wood
like a
deck.
wood deck.
No,
Pool deck.
I'm thinking pool
Yeah,
deck.
yeah, yeah.
I'm thinking
No,
cement around the pool.
Totally agree.
Okay,
with
that's
that.
what I'm.
Yes, yes, yes.
And just for the record, the deck has the same thing. You're not getting any, I mean, either runs down through the boards, through the stuff that doesn't have grass or anything, and it's mud and it's going through it, or it's running off the boards and going to the same place. Like, it's still causing that same problem.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, a deck is,
Similar.
Less
similar
than,
problem.
less than for a full course.
yeah, but not much
Right.
of a difference, I wouldn't think.
But it's interesting though, because if you think about a deck that's at like a second story deck and they didn't touch the grass underneath it, in some ways, it does concentrate it maybe a little bit, but we didn't actually cause more, we didn't disrupt absorption,
Right.
but it still would count against the accessories, right? Which is, it's a separate issue, stormwater versus just accessories.
But you do run into these new groups that are now putting those gutter systems underneath the deck. So you can use it as a fully,
Yeah. Oh,
dry
yeah.
patio.
Yeah.
So
But that's a-
I would like to suggest that we've kind of veered off
Yes,
from our
Thank you.
intended
Yes,
conversation.
yes, yes.
Well,
Yeah.
and if I can add, because that was one of the things I think as we kind of gone through this, because this is a short-term fix that's being proposed in here in an effort
Yeah.
to do so. We do need to take a step back and look at this holistically, looking at driveways, building footprints and all these other accessory structures. And then how can we incorporate more of those that are eco-friendly, or or the green things, I think you know, that we should provide bonuses or discounts to help facilitate those and do those things. But the other aspect of this is, you know, it's, you know, it was the stormwater, which I think, but it's also the green space. And when I talk about green space, it's not necessarily how much of the lot remains as grass. It is that each of these structures, whether it's flat or three-dimensional, causes a disruption in the grades. Things start to get leveled off. Swales that were once, you know, very, very shallow get pushed out towards the end of the properties and they become steeper. And then velocities start to increase. And that's the other aspect of trying to control. That's why there is still a cap in that process. And that's why there's still concern in that process. And I think, you know, that the 50% for the pool, you know, kind of addresses both issues. You know, it doesn't allow for that 1,000-square-foot pool without some penalty. But it also recognizes that pool is going to capture some water too. So, you know, I think, you know, one, and it's noted in the cover page, you know, when putting this together, an overarching goal was to look at it, how it impacts stormwater, but also how does it impact open space or green space, because it's that disruption of the property that happens. And again, that disruption doesn't necessarily mean that it's all concreted or made impermeable or permeable. You know, it is that the topographies change, and what was once a wider watershed that was coming in a diagonal direction, it gets concentrated to the back or the side. And that's what starts to disrupt the neighbor. It's still going downhill, but all of a sudden they see more of it because it's concentrated. So, you know, it's not when you look at those two goals, they kind of compete against each other.
We've run into this issue with additions too,
Yes. Mhm.
and that's kind of not part of this calculation at all.
Correct. It's a good point.
Have you noticed any increase in additions for home offices or other requests to put accessory structures that are kind of like work at home offices?
No, and it's a interesting question, because a lot of the times we don't get to see what is the interior project, the interior part of it. So somebody could get 120-square-foot shed and it becomes the she shed, or, you know, there's a term I've seen used there, the man cave type thing. That is possible. There's nothing that restricts it. But we usually don't get involved with what's done in the interior.
Right.
Now, if they start running utilities and things of that nature, that changes the whole classification and how it sits in the building code in there. Now, in some of these garages, and it's, you know, we get at least, you know, somewhere from none to a handful per year where somebody does a detached garage. And many of the times you have the interior footprint and you'll see that there's a woodworking room or something else that's noted in there. We do the inquiries. The primary concern is not creating a livable unit inside those. But now that in the planning world, that's now considered that we should be looking at trying to use that as a means to address how, you know, the housing or family structures, you know, that have kind of evolved over time. And that may be something that we look at when we do the update to the comprehensive plan of, you know, as we look at, you know, sustainability, as we look at equity and those things that these, you know, alternative housing units may come into play.
Carlos, did you have anything more that you needed to go through the
No,
report?
no, I know Mr.
Any more?
Rosenberg.
Go ahead.
Okay, so looking at page 6 here, you've got a screenshot of 832 Charles Gate. And I am very familiar with this one because the bottom right corner is my property. Now I'm looking at the numbers here. It's showing a 12,495 square foot lot, 756 square foot pool, 1350 paving. So that's way over 10% of what would have been allowed for the combined total. We're closer to like almost 20% on something like that, right? Was this like way grandfathered in for like a long time ago?
Correct. This was done before we had
Way-
that.
yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
I use that as an example. So,
Gotcha.
yeah, I probably should have put the year that it was constructed, but it was prior to our update to the accessory structures.
Okay, and looking at this now is a huge aha moment for me, because I will tell you right now, anytime there's a rain event, my neighbor's yard down here, there's a low spot. It's basically a pond,
Basically what?
a pond.
A pond.
Yeah, and so every day or every time there's a big rain event or a couple days of rain in a row, I am now realizing that I'm seeing the effects of this 20% accessory coverage area.
Right. Which way does the groundwater flow? in
So
that
this
picture?
is probably the highest point, and it flows here and then,
When you say here,
yeah, to the southwest.
to the southwest, okay.
To the south. I believe there's a storm drain. I know that when they've drained their pool, it drains to Berry Hill Drive, not to Charles Gate.
Really?
I'm not sure how that happens, but that's the way it drains. I don't know how they were doing that, but
It's
Right.
interesting. I mean, today we certainly have better controls
yeah,
and more careful stormwater rules, so that
That is,
exact
a-
situation wouldn't happen.
right.
I mean, that is a huge pool for that,
Mhm.
for that lot.
It would, and it would have to go to the Board of Appeals today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
How is it just pools that have been around for like with the last 10 years? Because I'm familiar with some addresses, but we're not listing the pools on here. How did you determine which pools you wanted to identify?
My understanding, what was requested from the commission at the last meeting was the ones that are listed in this page here.
Mhm.
I believe that's on your screen. These are the ones that, actually, all these were issued or were reviewed for permits this year, this
Okay.
calendar year.
Okay, so we're just looking at this year's
Yeah.
calendar stuff. Okay,
Now,
thanks.
the commission, I'll note, you guys did ask for about 10, and this was at least what was issued this year and reviewed this year. It was a little bit more difficult to go further back with the other items. And then in the PDF, because one of the requests was to actually see them. And that was in the PDF, but not in the printout packets that you have right now. So this one here is in St. Alfred, and actually this is getting ready to go before the Board of Adjustment. And there, for the purposes of the setback, it was not an issue of the total area or size. And it wouldn't be, it would still fall well below the threshold, even if this ordinance change didn't occur. Then you had a 724 Cherry Tree. You had one on Villa, and actually that was at one of your last meetings. I think in late October or early November. You had this one on Glen Mary. And this was a sizable one.
Can you zoom in on that?
Yes. Let's see.
Pool doesn't look
Is that-
too big, does it?
But
Is
it's
it the pool deck?
it wasn't necessarily the pool, it's the coverage.
Yeah.
When you look at the coverage table on the side.
Look at all that concrete and sidewalk around it.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Interesting.
So are we, I guess, are you looking for a vote tonight on this?
No,
purpose?
no, it's just
No,
to see,
okay.
to make sure we're going in the right direction and then to have a final, an ordinance prepared for you to look at our next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think it's in line with what we talked about last time, and it makes me feel more comfortable seeing the percentages.
Yeah,
I'm
it
good.
does.
I do too. I like it.
I do too.
Yeah, public.
It doesn't deal with every question that we have about accessory structures or
Yeah.
every problem, but it's a good way to deal with this
Chip away.
piece of the park.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. We do need to address public comments
We
related
do,
to
we
this.
do have one person that would like to address the commission. And before, so because I know it's limited to about 3%, I do want to kind of go over, unless you want to limit me the 3% or three minutes.
No, no.
But to kind of go over what some of these issues are, so he doesn't have to go through that whole process
Exactly.
in there.
Great.
So this represents the property at Cherry Tree, and this kind of initiated the thing because it went before the Board of Zoning Adjustment. And it's a property that's under 10,000 square feet. It's a little over 8,700 and something square feet. And the house footprint itself is, is a smaller footprint. They could have had a larger house on here, but they didn't. It was about 500 square feet smaller than the max. There's an existing patio, almost 200 square feet. And then once they had their flat work and their pool, they were up, again, this property was 8,700 square feet, just to use round numbers. So that would allow them to do 870 square feet of accessory structures. And that's pretty small, but it's also a very small lot. And that's where those percentages, even though they adjust in there for a smaller lot, it really adds up right away. And in addition to that, with the smaller house footprint, they don't get that extra bonus that they, that's lost. So they're even below what the maximum cap would have been. But anyway, so they came to the commission, and the original application that came in was probably asking for 1,700 square feet of accessory area. That included, the pool deck, the connection, the existing patio, and the pool footprint. They reduced that amount before they petitioned to the board, and I'll show you those numbers in a second. And they were still far than what the board felt comfortable trying to consider, because it was difficult to establish a hardship, but they did authorize for the property to go up to 13.75%. And that got them a little closer to 1,200 square feet. So, so in this case, this property has been granted, coverage of up to 13.75 square feet. That's a given. With the reduction of the pool, they'll be able to pick up a little bit additional square footage for the concrete work, but they'll still be short of what their original intent was. Our code, while we considered this property, the code itself wasn't written just for the purposes of that. So I'm going to provide, bear with me 1 second. This is just the kind of, so Mr. Trainer can kind of focus on what he's going to discuss, so you can have at least the square footages before you. Bear with me. Machine's a little slow. Okay. So again, the lot area is 8,700 square feet. So 10% of that is 870 square feet. They went to the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment said they can go up to 13.75%. So that will give them nearly 2,000 square feet of accessory structure. Their existing patio that's there is 198 square feet. Their original proposed deck was 725 square feet. That was reduced to around 400 square feet or so. There was a connector that was roughly 250 square feet. And the pool size was 651 square feet. If I only count 50% of that pool now, it's about 26 square feet. They would total 1,499 square feet, or 17%. And that's still well above what they would be authorized through the Board of Adjustment. So they're still 300 square feet over. So this ordinance still does not, address their full issue, but the intent here also was that, we weren't drafting this ordinance specifically for one lot either. But I did want to show you those numbers. I think Mr. Trainer wants to talk about those numbers. And that way you have a background, he can focus a little bit more what his goal was. So, if that's okay, Chairman, I appreciate you
great.
giving me the time. Mr. Trainin, if you're on, I'm going to transfer you as a panelist, and you should be able to address the commission. Okay, Mr. Trainin, you should be fully set and on.
And
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. If you can state your name and address, and then,
That'd be great.
Evan Trainin, 724 Cherry Tree Lane.
Go ahead.
Okay, so thank you very much for listening to me again. I was looking at the stuff that Carlos sent, and I'm looking at the house at 10 Glen Mary, and it looked like it has a existing hardscape of 1921, proposed new hardscape of 1151, which is about 2,400 square feet. And their lot is 19,620. So they're over their 10%. I don't know how they got a, and so you can't go with, I'm not trying to do the, like they said earlier, you did it for one guy, you got to do it for me. It doesn't matter to me why you guys approve that. I think when we originally talked about this last or 2 weeks ago, we were talking about how the smaller lots, because it's a small lot, can't get a decent pool or pool deck because of the 10%. And going to the 20% for lots under 10,000, whereas I guess the original proposal 2 weeks ago that people wanted to talk about the pool versus the structure or the lot size. Not now, Kylie, I can't do it right now. I'm sorry, I'm at home alone with my 4 children. So I'd like to, if it can get approved for, I guess you guys can't do the original or approve just one lot. I have to go back to the other committee who wouldn't stray far from what your intent was. So if I sent Carlos pictures of the original proposal versus what we have proposed now, that's under that 1,200 square feet. And my wife doesn't like it at all because there is next to no deck around the pool. We have one little seating area and then 3 feet around the whole pool. And the other end, by the deep end, we want to put a slide in because we have twins that are 4 and they would love a slide. But the slide is now crammed into this little area where I don't know if you'll be able to walk around the slide. So if you want to get from one side of the pool to the other side of the pool, you got to walk all the way around the other way. All these other pools, it looks like all these lots are at least around 1,500 square feet or bigger. So double the size of my lot. And I just want to put a pool and a pool deck roughly the size of most of these, or smaller than a lot of these, or the same size or smaller. And because of my lot size, I can't put a pool with a pool deck that we can all enjoy.
Okay, go ahead, Carol.
So the problem that you're having, as I understand, so tell me if this is correct. It's not an issue with the particular that we're discussing in front of us, but that in order to put in a pool that is usable for your situation and your lot, because it's small, you need greater than the total 10% coverage.
I think so. Going up to, as Carlos said, if we did the additional, where they gave me additional 3.75%, it's still not big enough for me to put a deck around a pool at the 50%. So there, for a small lot, we just need more accessory structure. You know, even going to, 5% will give me another 1.25%, which isn't going to do a whole lot on 870 square feet, on 8,700 square
Yeah.
feet.
Yeah.
A follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead, Carol.
So just so we have some idea of what you're suggesting. I need to ask what size coverage or what percentage are you thinking would be a good modification to make happen what you want?
The 7, I think, what's on the screen.
Well, with Carlos's numbers up there, if you did 50% of the pool, 17% gets me to exactly what I wanted at the beginning.
Okay, so you're saying that for your size lots, we'd have to consider almost doubling from the 10% in order to make it work for you.
Correct.
Sure. And I,
Let's let Carol finish.
So I was just trying to put some perspective on it, just to make sure that we understood what it was you were ultimately asking for.
The other thing is there's not a lot of lots in Olivet that are under 10,000 square feet.
Carlos, do we know the percentage of how many lots under 10,000 there are?
We did provide. I
There's
don't
a
have
map.
The exact number, but I do have that map that was put together. And if you bear with me, I'll get that back up on the screen. Got to do the stop share. And I think this was put together by Ms. Doty. And it kind of shows I'm gonna see if I can increase that size a bit.
I think down at the bottom, she has some totals.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where I was gonna try to get a little bit closer to get that red. Bear with me. About 548 parcels were below 10,000 square feet based on our analysis. 1,200 or double the amount were between 10 to 20. And then 815 were over 20.
It's roughly 20%.
Mhm.
Okay, okay. Now, let me ask you a question. In those areas where we have all the smaller lots, do we have increased drainage issues?
That's where we have a concentration of
You have
stormwater
increased
problems.
what?
Drainage,
Drainage.
stormwater, issues. That's the dilemma. that we
Well,
face.
MSD just came in and fixed our street.
But there are, and I understand that, but along Cherry Tree, the water's being directed to the properties at the southern point by the bike trail. We've had, even with the MSD improvements, just the surface water there, it's collecting, and they're at the bottom of the hill. I mean, it should be going to that direction.
Right.
But with the improvements that have gone into that subdivision, they've only made the conditions. They've increased the amount of stormwater drainage that's going through. Now, we have several homes that have incorporated their own detention systems, but that is only a handful of the new homes that have been built.
Right. Okay, thank you, sir. We appreciate your comments. But we do have, these are dilemmas that we face, with trying to balance out, the needs of the residents as far as, the amount of infrastructure that we have. But we'll take that in consideration. We appreciate it. We're not going to get to defining that until, I believe, another meeting. I think we're going to really just concentrate on the percentage of the pool at this meeting. So definitely pay attention to the meeting agendas because there'll be other opportunities to speak as well.
Thank you. Anything you can do to help me, I'd appreciate it. I'd like to get my pool built and improve my property and make my family happy.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I agree. It's a different conversation. The percentage of the pool is one topic. And I brought this up last meeting. I do feel that there is a valid argument to make that when we look at a property that's 9,500 square feet, 10%, is 950 versus a property that's 19,000 square feet and they have not 1,900 to play with. If they both want to put something in accessory structures that is 1,000 square feet, one's authorized, one's not.
Right.
And they're both hitting the same footprint to stormwater. They're both impacted. In terms of stormwater, it's equal. And you could argue, why shouldn't they be able to do it? There's a different conversation around green space in the area and the yard and things like that. But I think it takes a commission, it takes time to think through it, but I think the idea of a sliding scale, if you have a smaller property, maybe you should be able to use more of your property as you want it. But I agree, it's a tough discussion because, somebody could, they have a small property, put a shed in it, takes their entire backyard, but it's also their backyard.
Totally get it. But I also question or want people to be thinking about the density.
Oh, agreed.
If all of these people started, building to the maximum of all their accessories, what's going to happen in those tighter, denser streets?
I guess my concern is though, it's an aesthetic thing. I don't disagree, but is it fair to someone who has a smaller property? I mean, it's tough. But it doesn't impact stormwater any more than 1,000 foot.
No, it will. Because if you have, 10 homes in the same spot that might have only had 5 homes in another area, now you have potentially,
So I guess the larger global footprint or community footprint, we both impacted 1,000, but in that area, if there's more density, then that one area might be more impacted.
exactly.
Okay.
And that's the reason why I was asking about the density issues.
Yep.
Where do we have, are these the areas of high density, do we have more stormwater issues?
And looking at that map, if all the blues are together, that's a problem.
Yeah, sorry, Jody.
So are there any recommendations, like if you have this big of a pool, you need to have this much decking just to make it work? For,
I
as
don't know,
opposed
that's
to
a good
just saying, well, here's your pool and you only can get this much deck. But what's a recommendation for,
Like
when you build a pool this big, you should have X amount of decking around it?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
I mean, because
Like
we
with
can
Proton
guide
or-
this to the end of time, but what are the actual recommendations out there in the world that says, I'm building a pool, I want it this big, how much decking is recommended?
So you're looking for like a standard.
A standard or just some suggestions between, X and Y size for
Yeah.
say a 20 by 40 or 20 by 30 pool, which would be 600 square feet. How much decking is
Mhm.
recommended?
Right.
Have you
Right.
ever seen anything like that? I've never seen.
No, but I mean, I was kind of curious on those lines while I was looking at, if you look at 724 Cherry Tree Lane, and they had a proposed pool of 595 and an estimated pool deck of 407. And then if you went to Carlos's, with the guy, I believe he had 750 square feet of decking. I mean, that's a big difference between 400 and 750.
Right.
And that's really the 300 that the gentleman was talking about too, as well.
Right.
Right.
I mean,
The other-
so I'm
My
not.
quantity is also going to be based on the perimeter of the pool. If you've got an irregular shape, it may require more than a standardized rectangle. I don't know that there's a way to quantify that in terms of a standard.
Or look at the two drawn together, like 300, 400 square feet around the deck versus the 780 that they wanted. to see what the true difference is besides in the numbers
Right,
of how does it, how does it aesthetically look and function?
right,
Because you want it to be safe.
right.
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 Yeah.
I got another question. And I was just thinking about, there used to be a trend to build those 3-season rooms. And I still think a lot of people do it, but now there seems to be more of a trend of building outdoor, outdoor kitchens.
Barbecues. and different-
Barbecues.
yeah.
The 3-season room would be an addition. The outdoor kitchen would be an accessory structure. You know, and it is interesting with that other home, he's got 500 more that he could put on as an addition, but he couldn't use it as an accessory structure.
Yeah.
And so you kind of wonder, is there a way that you could balance some of that, but based on how much total buildable area you have?
Give back
Total
some
coverage.
of your house footprint that you didn't want to use.
Yes, but then you would have to then restrict him in the future that you couldn't build any
Exactly.
additions. That, I don't know if that's possible.
And that's interesting because, take 724 Cherry Tree again. Mr. Trainin has an existing, it's close to 200 square foot patio right behind his patio doors. So that's, that was the standard that was placed in there. If he put a roof over it for a trellis, that 200 square feet then goes into the house footprint calculation and gets removed from the coverage calculation for accessory structures. And it's something worth talking to him about. I mean, there's a cost to that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it could give him an extra 200 square feet simply by putting a trellis system over that
Right.
existing patio. Now, it's gonna have to meet some type of threshold. I'm not talking about just 2 posts and a cover,
Right, right,
but
right.
String.
but that would again shift that area just because of it becoming 3-dimensional as
Right.
part of the house.
Can I show some of
They're
the,
losing 100 square feet
law.
between the
Yes.
300 and 200.
really-
Yes.
Livable.
it really shows the flaw
Doable.
of the code in that
Yes.
regard, that it's a bigger, we almost have to think of it holistically on the footprint of the entire thing.
Exactly. And getting back into even driveway coverage and,
And what type of material? Because now I'm looking at a change to my patio and I'm gonna make it porous that feeds in. So it's like, in some ways then, I
Right,
shouldn't be deemed the
partially
same as if I
counts.
just did a flat slab.
right.
This is a.
But is it
interesting-
crushed rock that's compacted?
No, it's a certain type that actually is made to just seep down.
Oh, that's
and-
good.
Yeah, and it's more expensive, but
Porous concrete.
basic, but it's, new type of material for that. Yes, into a detention that I'm gonna draw to a rain garden.
Oh, nice.
And so, but it would still count as against me on in terms of accessory,
Right.
Oh,
Until we
yeah, that doesn't seem right.
review.
So
and-
that's why I think we almost have to keep all those things in the big picture, what type of material, percentage grading down based off lot size, based off density. It's not an
Yeah.
easy solve.
No, it's not. Well, I think we've talked this one to death right now. We got a lot to think about, but I do think we're on the right track with the pools, square footages and stuff. And I don't know if we could vote on it now, but I think we might have a consensus on that if we wanted to vote.
Then what about the step increase on those that need to go through?
You're talking about the pool amounts?
Correct.
Yeah,
The second part of this ordinance. And again, that's coming from staff. We did talk about it a little bit at the commission level. It was just of increasing, bear with me 1 second.
5 to 6, 6 to
Correct.
8, 8 to 1.
I'm fine with it, but unless you guys want to think it over, mull it over in light of everything else. I don't want to push anybody, for this.
I'm okay.
I'm okay with the change.
So we'll have a formal memo drafted along with the recommended motion
Good,
at your
good,
next meeting on the 16th.
great. Okay, let's move on to item, well, I guess we don't have it's not a B, but we'll move on to chapter 420 stream buffer regulations.
Correct. So several years back, the city adopted a template ordinance that was prepared by the Metropolitan Sewer District, and we adopted the ordinance without any changes to that in there. And what that ordinance was intended to do was to protect streams. And there was two components to it. One, to protect the stream bank. And then two was to help filter impurities, stormwater impurities going into the stream bank. So it had a dual purpose in there. In hindsight, now when and it had a pretty significant effect on properties along Olive, throughout all of that, not just on Olive. And I'll show you a visual in there. What we saw more or less was that people were petitioning for variances based on that the stream bank wasn't natural anymore. There were channels, there were concrete channels or Gabion wall channels, and therefore, the spirit and intent of protecting the natural stream bank, and I think it uses the term undisturbed natural vegetative buffer. That natural existence no longer existed in there. And then in addition to that, it required an additional setback to the buffer, and that was to help filter out those impurities in there. So we recently found that Brentwood, and then after looking at Brentwood, that some other communities had actually made amendments to that ordinance. And most of these were kind of inner ring communities within the county, because a lot of our natural streams no longer exist. And this does impact a lot of properties along Bond Price Terrace, Bond Hills, Indian Meadows, in such, and where we're providing a buffer for natural vegetative reasons to a concrete or Gabion made facility. And we don't think that's necessarily equitable and necessary. However, we are strong believers on the need to ensure that sediments are filtered before they get into whether it's a natural stream or an artificial walled stream. I think the second component of this is very important. That's why we participate with this MSD and this phase 2 aspect of it. And we think we can do both by being a little bit more flexible if a natural stream doesn't exist, but still provide the means to ensure that sediments are filtered before they get into whether you want to call it a channel or you want to call it a stream. So we talked about this back in October. You have a staff report that recommends that the commission have the authority to waiver the requirements for the undisturbed natural vegetative buffer if it's an artificially modified stream bank, I guess. And to ensure that when doing so, that we still look at any inlets that direct water into the stream, that there's some type of system to ensure that the stormwater is purified or filtered in there. Now, in the written report that you have before you, I had some repeated words in there, and I apologize. It's been corrected here on the visual, but you'll see that I think this paragraph here, the C second paragraph, has been modified compared to what's in your report. But anyway, what this would do, again, it redefines how the buffer is applied. The buffer is based on the United States GS maps. And if that map shows a solid blue line, you have to have a 50-foot undisturbed natural vegetative buffer. Well, in all of that, there are no solid blue lines. We don't have any of them identified that. But we have what they call other streams. And in those other streams, you provide, the current code is that you provide a 25-foot undisturbed natural vegetative buffer on both banks in there. What we're asking is that in instances where that other stream has been altered and the bank is now artificial, it's either a concrete or a Gabion system, that the commission be authorized to waive the requirement for that buffer But in doing so, to ensure that, that there's a ground filter system in place for anything that's directing water directly into that stream. And then we even added a section D, because we have some properties that the USGS maps show a stream, and even on our city hall property shows a stream running through here, but is not visible, or i.e. and no longer in existence in there. And again, this was a template that was prepared by another agency in cooperation, not just Olivet, but several other communities had adopted in there. So I'll show you an example of one here that will pop up in your monitors and screen, and bear with me, I'll get a little closer. But this is right by the temple. And you can see, if you're familiar with it, there's a concrete channel that runs along this area. When we adopted that ordinance, all of these properties were impacted and required a 25-foot undisturbed natural vegetative buffer, even though all those properties were already built out up to that wall, plus an additional 25-foot setback to allow for the filtration of sediments going into it. And it basically has made most of the, minimized any rear yard activity in those properties. 3 of those properties have gone to the Board of Adjustment in efforts to do a patio. And then we've had 2 new homes that were constructed in that area. And they agreed to provide in lieu of those variances. And those properties did come to the commission following for their design review. In exchange, the concern was from either the Board of Adjustment or the Plan Commission to ensure that any inlets that were in these properties that picked up water from the other side of the wall and just dropped it into the channel, that they provided some type of rain garden or BMP to help filter out those sediments from going into the directly into the bank. And that's what the spirit and intent of that ordinance is. Then we have situations, bear with me again, I'm going to stay on the same slide, but I'm going to move here to Bond Hills. You can see the USGS maps show this loop coming around here. There's nothing that exists. Well, and I'm sure it was there at one time, but it no longer exists. And now these properties over here are impacted by a 25-foot undisturbed natural vegetative buffer and a 25-foot setback. And then this channel back here is all concreted. And again, I don't have them up here, and I may be able to show them. This computer may be a little bit slower. There are properties out there too that in the industrial park that have similar situations. I don't know if I can get those up. No, it won't let me on this. So I do apologize on that.
You're talking about Dillon Rock Island?
Dealman Rock Island and also Dealman Industrial. And I'll get this up here. Just bear with me 1 second here.
Carlos, do we know the date that MSD published those maps?
It wasn't MSD's map published. It
Are
was
those
the
color
USGS. And they are 2000 version in there. And we've tried to figure out, and even when I had Jonathan here, and he was very astute to a lot of these stream information, couldn't figure out why, that apparently that either there is still some type of underground channel that exists that directs it back into the streams, and that maybe that's why they're still shown. But in a visual, you would not see them.
That's interesting.
And almost there, bear with me 1 second. It's more of the system being slow than. And this may be the best. Oh. Map I can share. Right, so this is a St. Louis County map. And you see these, at least in St. Louis County, you see these two blue lines here and this blue line here. Here's our city hall property. There's actually a stream that goes across through here, through this property on Short Line and back in and up here. Now, the county does a good job. It doesn't show it. But when you look at the USGS maps, it's still recognized in there. And there are more detention areas than or the placement of where detention areas were placed. And they all lead to the River de Pere back here. You'll see even properties on the north side of Olive that are impacted. Here's one in Indian Meadows. There's no stream, it's just a degree of a drop in elevations. And there could have been maybe one way back when. And then, of course, all these along the channel here, north of Indian Meadows Park.
Isn't that blue mark in Indian Meadows, isn't that where, I mean, they have the tunnel and drainage system right behind that?
Correct.
Because I used to play with it on the Granby side.
So,
And that's what you would consider an artificially modified stream bank because the water's going.
yeah,
there.
it's now a channel. I mean, it's more of a channel than it is a stream, if there's a distinction. What that ordinance does is it doesn't fairly recognize it.
So the first setback is for erosion control. The second setback is for cleaning
Correct.
material or cleaning the whatever. Cleaning the water that runs into it. I got a question because a lot of these streams are related to drainage from the streets. And when those, run into these streams, there's no cleaning that's being done, right?
That's correct.
So when we're requesting that some of these inlets have a cleaning device, but then there's like a street drain that drains right into it, we do kind of run into a funny
Correct. And
situation.
it could be that on one side of the street, it falls within the buffer setback, but the other side of the street doesn't. So you could have two inlets, one inlet that's just going to let whatever goes in goes through. The other inlet where we're trying to look at, if the property was being improved, having them address it with some type of mitigation
Right.
in there. Now, we haven't had that incident yet. The ones that we did address was that in the backyards, they actually had an inlet. And that inlet was, let's say, in the rear yard, And you can see where it just picks up the water and dumps it down the side of the concrete wall. And that's where we were asking that they put some type of vegetation in there to help pick up some of the sediments before going in. Here's the example. Don will be back next week after tonight's our last class night. But here's a good visual in the industrial park. And you can see all these buildings here, and you can see the USGS. This is the USGS stream map identifying all these right here, and they don't exist.
Wow.
You know, they may have at one time, but they're well covered now. And
Why do we need to care now?
well, and that's the intent. The literal application of the code would limit a lot of these businesses from doing improvements. What they got would be grandfathered in, but if they wanted to do additions or modifications, we would be, again, we would apply a common sense approach, but to CYA ourselves is that we would run on the Board of Adjustment and put the onus on them to make a decision so they can continue on. And it's just an unnecessary extra step.
Carlos, should we realistically put something in there where since we're bound by what's on a map, but it's clearly inaccurate for it today. Can we grant a waiver based on current conditions as opposed to what the map reports?
We could look at even adopting our own map and not referencing the USGS map.
Okay,
I
so
didn't want to, it's our ordinance, but I didn't want to veer too far away from what MSD had put out or put us kind of in the, fully we did our own things. Again, I was unaware that some of these communities took the initiative and made adjustments to it that are applicable to their urban areas in there. If they would have told us, we would have looked at it a little closer, maybe done so. We were also kind of limited in terms of our mapping services at that time when we adopted it. We know a lot more now. And again, the goal here is not to circumvent the goals of MSD. We want to be cooperative with them. But I think it inadversely impacts communities like all of that, where there's smaller lots, again, smaller lots playing a role. Most of the streams have already been altered in there, but we fully agree that, it is our moral responsibility to try to filter sediments from going into areas that collect water, whether they're a stream, pond, or channel, or so. We do have a responsibility to try to get that.
I think if we made our own maps, it would definitely simplify this.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely something we should consider doing. When you, in item C, you mentioned, providing that above ground filter system. If they put in a filter type system or a rain garden, I assume that would be acceptable. If they did something like that, then item number 2, the additional setback wouldn't necessarily apply. Because isn't the intent for the additional setback to clean?
Well, there would be 2 aspects to that. That in the 25 undisturbed natural vegetative buffer would essentially would go, and that other setback would get put in. The setback would still happen. That's what the intent is. And bear with me as I get the language just to make sure I understand it. It's a good point, and that was one I was kind of mulling over in there. So there would be the way it was laid out and kind of following what the existing language was set there is I broke it up that there's the solid blue lines, which I know we don't have any. There are all other streams. Okay, so that means that they're existing in there. Now, some of these other streams now have artificial banks. So the commission would waive the requirement to do an undisturbed natural vegetative buffer. Now, in the second part of this ordinance, they would be subject to the setback of 25 feet, in which, you know, the impervious cover shall be permitted in setback rating, you know, which would be minimized. So that way we still maintain 25 feet in there.
Go ahead, Carl.
Realistically, when we look at our stream and all of that, how many spots in there can we identify that are actually still natural vegetative streams that this ordinance would actually?
We can get,
Realistically
actually, given the
pertain to.
capabilities that we have, you know, with this year, especially with the acquisition of Don,
Mhm.
and not that Jonathan couldn't, we just now have the software that he helped us put together in there. So now she's be able to use it. We can come back to you with all the properties that are currently impacted by the, similar to what we did for the pools in the areas. In there, we can provide you visuals of where there are improvements within those setbacks. So you can see how many properties were inadvertently impacted in there. We didn't have that capability last year or even when we adopted this ordinance to see what those differences are. What we want to make sure we do, and just going back to the chairman's question, is that, you know, that there is still 25 feet provided between the bank, whether it's natural or artificial, and where improvements could occur to allow for that filtration to happen. And it may be the wording I have in here that, you know, the intent is that in no case would the city waive having some type of buffer or setback unless it's not there at all. And I'll take a look at that wording.
I think
So
you-
I'm just wondering, I mean, if we really don't have very many, if any, natural vegetative areas left, if even this is still just making something very complicated for our situation.
Correct, but we still maintain, at least, you know, show a cooperative spirit with Metropolitan Sewer District, that we're supporters of what they call the phase 2 aspect of this. I think, you know, in hindsight, you know, this ordinance wasn't good for us.
Carlos, what if you separated it into two sections? One with natural banks that would basically mimic what, you know, MSD recommended. And then another one for artificial banks. And you
As
could
opposed to
define
doing,
that,
okay,
and then discuss, you know, the whole issue that the initial, you know, that what kind of setbacks would be required for those,
okay.
or what kind of controls. And I'm almost wondering if you have an artificial bank and you have no inlets going in there, maybe you don't need any, you know, buffers. But if you have inlets, then you want to be 25, you know, foot radius, if you will, of undisturbed land around that, that inlet, or some other cleaning device. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Because what I would hate to do, and I don't know if this would ever happen, but if you had an artificial bank and you had the ground sloping away from there, where it's definitely not going to, you know, go into that stream bank, then a buffer would not make sense at all. Does that make sense?
yes, because on the properties that are along Bond Hills Terrace, or Bond Price Terrace, just north of the synagogue, if you take a look at those, they have the concrete channel that runs along the rear of the southern properties. And the concrete channel, the top of the concrete channel actually extends above the grade of about maybe 3 to 4 inches. So the concrete channel, here's the water in the channel. Here's the wall, and their backyard's grade up like this in there. But then in here, they have periodic inlets, every other property. And they just collect the water from their backyards. And there's a pipe that, you can see the little hole on the channel wall where the water goes in, just comes out that way. So that in theory, none of their surface water is going over the channel wall
And,
and into the channel. But those inlets are important because that's collecting all that water.
so if you did a 25-foot radius around the inlets,
Mhm.
then you would protect. You
Yeah,
would-
and
you'd
then
meet
somebody
the
could
intent.
utilize their full backyard if they maintain that grade below that lip.
Right.
Good point.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion? Carlos?
No, I think I got some direction. We'll get that.
And
kind of put
then
together,
I
and we'll
do
get some
think
more
the
visuals.
idea of, well, if we separate it, you could probably mimic this and keep it exactly what MSD provided for the
Mhm.
natural, setbacks. But I do think consideration could be for creating our own map too, Do we have any public comments related to this?
No,
Okay. I think we'll move on to other business, number 5, and item A, meeting
we
minutes.
don't have any minutes prepared for you tonight. So
Good, good.
apologize on that.
So we'll move on to reports.
Reports, our activity continues along the corridor. I'm going to start off towards by 170 in there. And I think everybody's kind of heard, like on the Youth City side, looks like Clayco is now taking over that along with some partners, and it's no longer the Novus group. So our understanding that they're getting the building pad ready, and then they turn it over to Costco, and Costco builds their building and all that. It is interesting in terms of we're assuming that the big mound of dirt is just storage in there, because it even goes higher than the freeway
Yeah.
when you see it.
On the other side of the street.
But I'm very curious about the streetscape that they've created with that retaining wall and all there. Now, they got quite a bit of open space, but I think they're going to have another lane in there. So, that distance between the curb and this retaining wall is going to be pretty less. And it's a pretty intimidating retaining wall with not much articulation. But it's moving along. And there we're not very, it hasn't become very clear like what is going to happen on the south side in there. So we've heard from some property owners along the south side that they haven't even been approached yet. So that's what we know about on that area. As you move towards into all of that on Olive Crossing, the grading is, that preliminary grading is probably past 75 to 85% complete. They are storing some dirt in the back, at the very back end where the hotel would be, because the Ameren line that runs diagonally, and then that gets moved back towards the front. So there is some deviation there, and that will be set back down. The soldier wall, we've heard a lot of compliments on that. It's been pretty interesting to see them put it up and all that. And now if you look behind the soldier wall, they're working on that area that catches the water and then redirects it in there. And they've managed to stay away from that tree. So there's been at least over 10 feet of a distance between that wall and the tree area in there. So, and then right behind, once that soldier wall is, it does have these, it looks like they're 2x4s that run up high. Those will get removed eventually. And then behind the wall itself, there'll be the buffer wall that will be installed that goes, the full length of the property in there. They have applied for their permit on the apartment complex and garage, and those are being reviewed by staff at this point. We anticipate there's going to be some lane closures on Olive, as Missouri American is going to do a boring probably right in the middle of Olive. So get ready for some traffic backups in there that's controlled by MoDOT, and MoDOT is cognizant of ramp movement and tries to minimize it to certain times, but you'll probably get some be waiting in line, unfortunately.
When do you
through
think that will
process.
start?
We're thinking that they're gonna do that next week, and if, once I confirm it, we're gonna send out one of those email blasts just to let people know.
Good.
In there. So I think that kind of covers that aspect. If there's any other questions, I'd be glad to answer them in there. We received a letter on Tuesday that all the properties on Irvington and Rhyme now belong to the Opus Group. They went and put up some fencing in there. We had already some incidences of whether it was some of the existing residents that removed some materials from these houses, or they were broken into and all that. So they worked quickly to kind of enclose that area and then inform our police and fire department. They've been working cooperatively to kind of make sure that we're monitoring any unnecessary activities in those areas. So they're going through the environmental process. I know gas has been closed for all 23 houses. They went ahead and just did that. And I think that was a good thing just to get that point out. But then they'll have to do the individual utility disconnections, asbestos testing, and the other environmentals. So we don't anticipate any houses coming down to probably January. You know, but they've been really good at moving up their schedule. So if it happens earlier, we'll be happy. And they're just to get any unnecessary activity or opportunities are out. So they've been pretty cooperative to work with. As you start heading towards westward, Firestone, you know, that's progressed pretty neat. We knew that the building, when we put a little info on the website, because when they were going to put the sheathing around it, it was going to look like a tin building, and that's not what was approved by the commission, and that there was a reference to the final elevations and all that. And you saw the brick pallets have been brought in. There's been delays on the exterior, yeah, side, the exterior work, and we've been on them to try to get the sidewalk set and in place. And we hope by tomorrow that we'll have some temporary access, at least on Dealman, so people can go north, south, and get to the intersection safely. In there, if you go down Dealman and then head to Old Bottom at Birdie Lane, they should be preparing to start putting the ground area for the street in there. There was some disruption today as Missouri American was doing a water tap for a main that's going to run through there. So that was neat to see in there, and it's pretty impressive, the site. We do have an application for another home in there that will be in our January meeting agenda. So if I continue down Old Bottom to Old Bottom School, again, that was a pretty impressive footing and foundation system that was in place. We'll start seeing more of a three-dimension pop-up come there, and there may be some material issues that may hold up, you know, how quickly they can move them in terms of ordering it and all that. Going back to Dealman, heading west, and actually I'll stay on Dealman. Mr. Cohen and Douglas Properties has submitted an application. They have acquired the properties from Castlegate all the way to the back of Jiffy Lube, so it doesn't include Jiffy Lube. And he's proposing a townhouse development here that'll come to the commission in January. So we're in the process of taking in the plans, putting up the notices. Hopefully they'll go out next week, let residents know that the process is going to begin. It would require rezoning to be put together. And they're now, we've seen on the website, he's had the plans and some visuals for quite some time up there. That doesn't necessarily reflect what the city would approve or not. So it's got to go through a process just like everybody else. At the same time, we have, going back towards Firestone, if you go 2 lots over where the Alzheimer's property is, or the Alzheimer's building is located, it goes down, and that's right across from Mobile. There's a road that goes down along the Alzheimer's to a 2-story office building right behind it. and then to a large surface parking lot that's in the very back. And that surface parking lot is zoned residential, but has a special permit that would authorize office parking in there. The owner of the property, who's also a resident of all of that, is looking to redevelop that back parking lot into about 15 townhouses in there. It's a nice development that would require rezoning that would be coming to the commission beginning probably in January also.
That's a gentleman that had the property, the land that eventually, he was concerned, and eventually the business behind Mills Towers was approved. 10 years ago.
It was well before my time. You know, his offices are there, and he also lives here. Or maybe, or something, I can't recall. There was an incident at Jiffy Lube that required them to, that we had to close it down until they had an analysis of the building. And that's why if you've gone that direction, it's been pretty well empty, but they're moving on that. A car ran into one of the corners and there was enough crack in the building that we didn't find it safe, and that they had to get an engineer and company to take a look at that before they open up.
Did you get told it was structurally safe then, or what?
We have no reason to believe that it's not, that it won't be. And we're just kind of waiting on them to assure us. The Oliver at the old City Hall grounds, they're looking at, you know, near completion by February and occupancies by March. They have a really nice website available now where you can reserve your unit and get information on the amenities and all that. It looks really nice interiors, really top notch, and we're excited about that. Across the street from them is Plant Haven, and they're putting the decking on the building today. We're scheduled to meet with the owner to kind of talk about what his thoughts are on the rest of the tenants as that's moving along. So we're good with that. And I think that concludes all the way down to Worsen to where the community center, and that is still progressing as they're getting ready for, they're still doing site work and prep work for the building there. So I think that gives a full tour. Be glad to answer any questions or
What about
details.
easy storage?
Easy storage. Hey, that's a good one. I forgot about that. That they're coming to council, I believe, in December at one of their December meetings. And they've had some issues in terms of how some assessments were, how that was going to impact their performa and such. And they're going to be talking with council about a chapter 100, I believe. And that allows them for the sales tax, you know, exemption. And then I'm not sure there would be any additional property abatement in that process.
Are they still doing construction there now? Is there a need?
No, it not since they got the you know, the stormwater.
So is there a need for all that fencing around there? I mean, it just looks kind of funny to have all that fencing, no activity.
Yeah.
All that, what then?
Fencing.
The fencing, yeah. I'd have to take a look at that if there's still any holes in the ground that I may not be, because I know they put their detention system in.
Right.
If there's anything that would limit somebody going in there, then it could be unnecessary.
But I wonder, I mean, if it's just gonna stay vacant for a long time, maybe they need to sod it or do something,
Mhm.
you know, get rid of the fencing. You
Well,
know,
If they're
It's something we
planning
can
on
talk
going
to
to
them.
council
yeah,
December and they want to do chapter 100, but still.
but, right, but if it delays now for another 6 months, it's starting to look kind of like an abandoned, you know, construction site,
Mhm.
which looks kind of like an eyesore, you know, there's nothing going on with it.
The bigger eyesore was a big mountain and nothing, where we said, get her down.
Do some.
At
yeah.
least it looked like construction, you know, but I mean, it's just,
We can talk to them, no problem,
yeah.
absolutely. And I think that kind of wraps up on the planning items. Mayor.
Mr. Trejo always does a wonderful job. We will continue to have discussions with people interested in coming to our community and banging a hammer and creating some new looks within our city. I really have nothing more to add to what Carlos has said. But I will indicate that we had a groundbreaking ceremony on in November. Was it November 13th with regards to welcoming the new community center. And as Carlos indicated, the work has begun with regards to preparing for the ground and site work for our new community center and improvements to the park. So thank you all. It's an important and a necessary move, and we'll see what 2022 brings us. I really appreciate everything you guys do. Thank you much.
And maybe you guys already talked about this last meeting, but we do have a new commission.
Yes, I did. We do. Yeah, at this point in time, we did do a, we appointed Rick Knox as the latest city council member to the city of Olivet to replace former council member, former mayor Ruth Springer. It was a shock. I didn't know, but Rick Knox has a long history in Olivet, is our former police chief, and he's an exciting guy. And as I said to him, you are the male version of Missy Waldman. So, while I didn't know it, it was a shock, but it's a good situation, a good decision. And he's a very, very mindful, very caring individual, along with the people that did interview for that process. They were all very good in stepping up and providing their input and their interview process. I was impressed with a few people, and I hope that they hang around. Thanks.
And it was a quite successful turkey trot.
It was a very, very successful turkey trot. Thank God the weather was very beautiful. That we didn't really get that cold until later on in the afternoon. $14,000 raised, and numbers were of the participants were nice, including the virtual, and the volunteers just continue to shine every year. God bless those. Like Mr. Lewis, who chose to be there at 5 o'clock in the morning to get prepared for this event, as well as Mr. Spiegelglass. And so it's always a good thing. It's a really good community opportunity and event. So you all did a really good job. So with that, I just want to wish everybody happy, healthy holidays. I think we'll meet one more. Are we meeting
We
one
have
more
our
time?
meeting on the 16th, and I got 4 homes on the docket for that in there, and then hopefully consideration of those tax amendments.
Good,
further
good.
goes on.
Knew it wasn't going to last. The light agenda load. So enjoy it while we can. All right. I guess we'll close the meeting out at 8:46. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Happy Hanukkah, everyone.